but we can do a little bit of review. So I'll start with what we're doing in hydrostasy, because everything we're talking about from now on is going to fall into the hydrostasy category. And I've made hydrostasy into a step-by-step type of thing. And the reason is because it's the practice that I do. So this is how I set up my practice throughout the day. So now we're getting to the point where I am really just explaining, what I do. So when we get to the axis of hydrostasy, that's where I'm putting my mind most often. That's my go-to. But I build it. So it's like a food pyramid almost, where I put some very basic things on the bottom as I wake up in the morning, as I go throughout the day, and I slowly add to that pyramid until I'm out the door and I'm in my primary technique. And my primary technique is the second attention, splitting everyday experience with that artist's edge, with that, yeah.
But you build you rebuild the structure before you go there.
I build it every day. Yeah. So I'm like Bob the Builder. I don't know if people would remember Bob the Builder. I forgot I'm getting old.
Doesn't seem old to me. It seems like yesterday. And it was my nephews, it wasn't me. I wasn't watching about the building.
Yep, that was Kobe.
Yeah, that
Kobe's
was Kobe.
generation.
Kobe's generation. Yeah, Bob the Builder.
Ah,
So hydrostasy starts with the four directions. So then that's where I start. I always engage my four directions pretty much right away. So pretty much as soon as I wake up in the morning, I have four directions of attention. And I guess I'll review that real quick. Is this would definitely need to be crystal clear on what the four directions are. One, what we view as outside. Two, what we view as inside. Three, I'll just put cognition because that one came to my mind first. Direction of cognition, and then breath. So hydrostasy practice, the whole Qigong practice now begins with the four directions. I introduce that right away. Of course, in the beginning, you're just selecting from the four directions and then something out of your toolbox that's in those four directions. Just
right.
check and go. Check and go is the primary technique in basic alignment. The primary technique in counterbalance of Qigong is the redirection technique. Really, that's the main two things that we're doing. So if we really look at it in the bare nuts and bolts of what we're doing, we're establishing connection using deliberate points of attention that are intended in advance. We're redirecting back to those deliberately intended points in order to maintain them. And then once they're maintained and they gain momentum, we can establish attention on the abstract. That's pretty much it. That's the bottom line. And then if you are able to put your attention on the abstract, that implies non-interference, non-resistance, and of course, a lot of the other things that we talk about are going to be a direct result of that practice.
You mean include the abstract, right?
What do you mean?
You build that up to the point at which you're now including having points of attention on the abstract, not so that you can have.
Yeah, we start
It's not exclusively on the abstract.
No. You mean exclusively as in only?
Yes,
Well, I wouldn't be able to do anything else if it was only.
I understand.
Yeah.
Just said so that I can. And I don't know, it sounded like, well, it's the tendency to do that. Now that I'm focused on this, that disappears, and it's not. It's a layering.
It's a layering, and in the beginning we have alternating attention as opposed to second attention. So when we
Okay.
first start this and when we're going through this, we're alternating our attention back and forth to different places. And then even when we're maintaining, we're still kind of alternating because we're still counterbalancing a little bit.
Right.
And then some of the techniques that I'm going to lay out in Qigong, they layer, they build, they definitely layer, like 100%. There's a reason that paying attention to shadows and reflections will lend to the abstract nature of the bubble of perception later, because those are kind of what I would consider the abstract elements of the moment. Shadows are there, but they're not really there. What the hell are reflections? Stuff like that, you know?
Yep.
Of course, we know what reflections are, but you know what I mean? Like it's an abstract thing that's occurring.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to grab some coffee. And then, of course, my thesis connects to the abstract because that's something that the human species, if you don't give it attention, you'll lose your connection to it. You'll lose your ability to perceive it. It, like an organ in our body, maybe will cease to have a function over time if we don't use it. So one of my primary thesis is that at some point in human history, we started using the word spiritual in religion and then eventually on the internet in memes, but we stopped feeling it. We stopped giving it our attention. We stopped giving this aspect of ourselves, really, if we're going to look at it that way. We stopped giving this aspect of ourselves attention because it was interrupted with the stream of repetitive thought. And attention started to just go to that. And then what are we thinking about? That's also what our attention goes to, the objects of desire. Those are the things that start to get our attention. And of course, that's where the destroyers come in.
Sure. And operating below the threshold of recognition, also there's a belief, there was for me, that I couldn't do any those things that you explained. I can only do one. Either I'm in my spiritual place, or I'm in my physical place, or I'm
Mhm.
living my daily life. It wasn't about doing it simultaneously as a whole human being. It was
Mhm.
fragmented off into pieces and
Yeah,
places where I would visit to do those things.
yeah, that makes sense. Give me just 1 second. I'm going to
Shayna, do you know if Ernest posted that the room was open? I have no idea where my phone is, nor do I care at this moment. I just wanted to see if he told the group that the room was open.
Let me check. Yep, he made a message. Yeah, he sent a message, Donna.
You said yes?
Yes, he made a message in the.
Okay, good. Thanks. I have no idea where my phone is. Probably upstairs still.
All right. I think if there was ever a clever bystander that was just watching, going through our YouTube, they would realize that basically what I've done is I have dissected and organized and what's the right word? I have basically learn some of the most efficient ways to collaborate with the human experience. So for example, and this will all lead to the four destroyers, but for example, we talk about the act of adaptation as being one of the primary things that this overall system will help a person with. Why? Because they have cognitive attention. That means a person is paying attention to their own mind as they're thinking. Emotional attention, which leads to emotional intelligence, but awareness of the emotional soup. How do you feel? Like, where did that come? You already know the answer to these questions. It's already privy to you. So we have behavioral. Hold on a second. Coffee makes my nose run a little bit. But then we can see our own behaviors as they're occurring. So what are we ever adapting to as human beings? So the most glaring, obvious thing that we may have to adapt to are situations in our life. If your basement has flooded, if there's somebody trying to punch you in the face, if space junk is falling from the sky, that would be a physical, literal situation in your life experience that you have to adapt to. Another area of necessary adaptation is our own biology, our own physicality. We change on a daily basis, so we have to adapt to our own bodies. We're aging, and that requires a certain degree of adaptation. I don't buy into all the things that people say about aging, but aging is aging. So, you know, there are going to be some changes as that occurs. So that is accepted science. So we have to adapt to physical situations. You know, the basement's flooded, got that. We have to adapt to our own biology, the body that I woke up with today, which includes the emotions and everything, because that's where emotional soup is coming from. It's coming from our body. So I would just clump all that together in the same category. So what else are we adapting to? What else needs adaptation?
Our mind, the responses to all of those things happening, is really the major adaptation.
It
And
is.
it's not
It's on the
just in
whiteboard.
counterbalance, because once you are moving to the phase out of counterbalance, I still think it is, though. It's hard for me to. I see what you're saying, that it's no longer counterbalance, but I think of it as like riding a bike. You know, there's that gross motor coordination that you have to do. And at first, it feels like you have to think about so many things at one time. Don't look at, you know, what you don't want to bump into, and you know, how to balance your body. But all of those things are still occurring when you get better at mastering the balance of all of them and adapting to the changes in the road and going up and down the curve or making turns and all the adaptations that are required to do that. You're still, the adaptation and balance is still occurring. It's just a fine-tuned process where it's not pulling you so far out that it's demanding all of your attention in one area. You're balancing lots of different things, with your vision, with your body, with the pedaling, with the, you know, all of it at one time. And that's what hydrostasy feels like. And then, you know, then you can take your hands off the handlebars and steer without them. But there's still counterbalancing going on. It's more adaptation because it's such fine motor coordination that it doesn't feel like counterbalance. It feels like adaptation.
Mhm.
But
Which
it
is just,
still is, right?
yeah, but that's why a different word would be required, because we are trying to convey two different ideas that are based on the same thing. So if I use the term counterbalance, that's almost assuming that we're going outside or away of our hydrostasy circle. So we're getting out of our balance, therefore we need to rebalance. What you're talking about is the smooth ebb and flow, where our kite is still experiencing wind. So we still need to, you know, fly our kite. It's not assuming that we have a hold of the kite string for a change, we still need to fly that kite. So we still need to do some stuff, or surfing, you could call it, like you're surfing now.
Right, we're still experiencing gravity, you know?
Well, and biology, that's
Yeah.
one of the areas of adaptation. So the areas of adaptation that we have direct influence over or less direct influence over, obviously the ones that we have less direct influence over could be situations. You maybe didn't have as much say over the basement flooding or space junk falling from the sky. You definitely didn't have a say in that one. That one just happened. So that's situations. But then again, we can put ourselves in particular areas and particular situations that can, influence the factors of what situations we're going to need to adapt to. So I'm not saying that we have no influence over them, but that's the least. That's one of the ones that we have the least influence over, at least at times. So the second one, the the one that we have the obvious most amount of ability to influence, of course, would be psychology, because that's actually what we're adapting to. We're simultaneously creating. So we're creating what we need to adapt to, which is insane. That is a good word, or a good way to look at insanity. But we have our situations. If we look at the whiteboard, we have situations that we have to adapt to, and even our own biology, that there's times where your biology will be beyond your direct ability to influence. For example, you're getting older, I'm getting older. There's going to be changes that are relative to my DNA, my heredity, the way that I've lived my life so far. Again, I'm not trapped by anything, but these factors will play a role. They've played a role my whole life. I have had a predisposition towards alcohol, so I have to navigate alcohol differently than maybe other people do. So I have to find the balance with that a little bit different than somebody who doesn't have that predisposition genetically. So again, there could be areas of our biology, and this is probably one that is an easy 50-50, aspects of our biology that are directly influenceable, but we just take no responsibility for it because we think we have no willpower, and it's the way we are. I was raised this way. This is just me. This is who I am, or whatever. But then we get into
Well,
psychology.
we haven't adapted to it,
Mhm.
sometimes I don't think about my aging to the extent that I'm not doing the things I need to do now to maintain full range of motion and things like that, and I don't realize it until I'm in a situation. I squatted down to play with the baby at the birthday party, and I was in a full squat, giving her something to eat, and then I was like, oh, getting up from here is a whole new ball game. Like my body's saying, either don't do that anymore or do it more often so you can do this more elegantly. And I was surprised because I didn't think that I was, as challenged as I was in that.
Yeah, and then so that's our body that we have to adapt to. You have to adapt to that squat. Getting out of that squat, more importantly, is something that is necessary for adaptation. If you want to be more efficient with that dynamic, then you would need to do more squats, outside of baby time. That's what adaptation means. That's what, a practice can develop, is being aware of yourself and making changes. So as we progress through this system, I have set this up that it will lead to one of the 4 aspects of the first 3 layers. I'm glad this is you and Karen and Shayna, because you guys know what the hell I'm talking about. But in the first 3 layers, we have 4 primary results. One of those results is impeccable self-awareness. I take that to a whole other thing in hydrostasy, because typically when we talk about self-awareness, we're not going to talk about it the way that I talk about it in hydrostasy. But in the beginning, self-awareness are those acronyms: cognitive attention, behavioral attention, emotional attention, things like that. So that is, I was going to make a post the other day and I just ended up not, because I just didn't. But know thyself. We start working with that from the very beginning of the Qigong system. But by the time we get to hydrostasy, we're looking at that in a whole new way, in a way that all the hipsters talk about, all the memes will resonate with, but we put ourselves there deliberately, intentionally, and not fancifully. It's not fantasy. Like, we are putting our mind somewhere specific. And whether Donna can see that or not, whether Karen can see that or not, it doesn't matter because I see it. I know where my mind is. That's the way that I use the word abstract. Abstract and literal. Literal, abstract, they're both there. We know that air is there. And this is the physical wall. So we have literal and abstract. That's kind of an in-between air because it's both abstract and literal. But your imagination is quite abstract to another person. And I'll stop with that word I don't go too far into that abstract. So that's kind of a line that I'll create principles around to stay there, but I don't really divide that up too much. I'm not trying to determine that for a person because I understand there's an aspect of hydrostasy that will be unique to each individual, and I don't want to manipulate. That would be a form of interference, so I don't interfere with that. Once a person goes through the system and they get to that point where they're able to express that, they're on their own. They got to go do that. That has nothing really to do with me. Okay, so we're still leading to a discussion on the destroyers. So we're kind of setting up hydrostasy, what hydrostasy looks like, because it is in hunting power that we really start to work with the destroyers. And when I say work with, I mean that very lightly, because the main thing that we want to work with, if anything, is the nemesis, a mind that is below the threshold of active recognition, which I shouldn't need to define what we mean by active recognition, but I have really good ways to define that. I have really good ways to talk about what do I mean by active. And basically it's a form of passive cognition where you're just going with whatever habits and momentum and sticky points of yourself that you've created. You're just expressing all of that below the threshold of active recognition. In a Tai Chi perspective, it's double weighted. Attention is doubly below active recognition. It's always going to be partially below. It has to be. But our trick or our job with hydrostasy is to create balance to where the mind is simultaneously above and below the threshold of active recognition at all times. Does that make sense? Because it will always be below. You don't have to do anything for that. But we do need to do something to make it above. All that makes sense so far?
It does, and it's 2 degrees also. At this point in my practice, I start in the morning when I wake up and I'm building my practice, and I was getting ready to go to Brooklyn, and I had to be there. I had to be on the road a certain amount of time, and I've become used to my day evolving in my own timing. And so I had to be on a schedule. Didn't realize it was daylight savings time. So some of the analog clocks in the house were a different time than, so when I was paying attention to time, passage of time, which I don't do often, I realized, I gotta get out the door. And that thought pulled me a little bit out of my hydrostasy practice because my focus became my bubble became less populated with this, and I was going out the door, and I could feel the pull away from feeling balanced and being in my practice because I had this time constraint, and I felt it. And I had to, I stopped and said, "Do you have everything?" And, I felt that I was prepared, and I put stuff in the car, and I dismissed it. I dismissed that recognition that I was being pulled out away from the degree of practice that I wanted to be in. And I said, I overrode it with cognition. And I said, "Of course, you went over this a million times, just get in the car and go." And it didn't really matter to me. There was nothing that I could have forgotten that would have been so terrible or whatever. I would adapt. It was my hearing aids. I didn't have my hearing aids in my ears, which is kind of a big deal when you're at a party with a ton of people and little kids talking. And it really wasn't a problem for me during the day. But I just wanted to say I could feel because I have an established practice and I started and I build it and I'm committed to it because it feels better to do that. It's the way I want to live, that I can feel the pull away from it. That's how I practice now. I can feel when I'm not, it's not my cognition that takes over and then I bang my knee and do something and then I go, oh, when's the last time I thought about my points of attention? There really are there right away. I'm thinking about my breath. I'm thinking about now I am really doing the dantians, middle, upper, middle, and lower dantians, and my body awareness is more balanced with my practice, but I can feel the pull away from it. And then what I do with that really makes a difference of whether I stay in it and move toward the abstract or whether I go way back to counterbalance rule of three and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a feeling thing.
Mm-hmm. And the rule of three finds itself in hydrostasy. It's not counterbalance rule of three. It's a different, your rule of threeing to put your attention, where you want it to specifically be, using the same elements. So reminding yourself with words that this is what I'm paying attention to, and then you populate with multiple points of attention, and so you're kind of talking yourself through that. So that still shows up in hydrostasy, but it's less of a counterbalance technique.
It's that fine tuning. It's
More
that
fine-tuning,
gross
sure.
as opposed to fine tuning. That's
Yeah.
that's why I made that bicycle reference. That's how I think of it in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm riding the bike. I'm balanced. I'm doing it. But how fine tuned am I with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so these are the primary areas of adaptation in the human experience. They're also, we kind of talked about which are within our most closest reach or our ability to directly influence them. And that, of course, is our psychology. So it makes sense that we have a system that starts with psychology. It starts with the mind. It starts with the way that we think, because most people, I would say, ordinary cognition is creating the psychology that it needs to now adapt to. And that is a very dysfunctional dynamic. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So
Would you
yes.
say that again, please?
So there are three primary areas in your entire life experience that you'll need to adapt to. Situations, that could be your basement flooding, maybe you won the lottery. You have to adapt to that, right? Space junk falling from the sky. That is also the area that potentially you have the least amount of influence over. Potentially, because we still do have some influence over where we put ourselves physically. However, if space junk falls from the sky, it just fell from the sky, and there's very little that you could do about that. So we have situations in our life experience that we need to adapt to. That's actually the main one for the evolution of species, is we just need to be able to adapt to our situations in our environment. Does that make sense? Yeah, so that's one area of adaptation. The second area of adaptation is our own biology. We're aging, our body changes on a daily basis. We need to adapt to that. That includes emotional output, because we're a chemical experience. Our interpretation is a chemical interpretation. That's how our mind and our body makes perception, with chemicals, right? So we have to adapt to our own biology. Without these chemicals, you would not have emotion. You wouldn't be able to feel certain things. The human experience would be completely different without this chemical cocktail that we have going on in our brain and in our body, because it's all working together, of course. The interpretation is assembled. The final assembly is a product of the mind, though. The assembly, where everything comes together, is in three parts of the human experience. the energy aspect, the unseen, the physical body, and the psychology. But Jerry, the third that we have to adapt to is our own is psychological things. And that's what most people are trying to wrap their brain around in their everyday life experience, or the psychological situations that they're creating for themselves that they now need to adapt to. So anger, frustration, these types of emotions, it's coming from the mind, is being expressed biologically, and it's just messing everything up. So we have to adapt to those things.
I think what was interesting for me in the moment when I asked, and I can't repeat it, but I just heard you say, most people are reacting something, you said, instead of, and that's like insanity, or I can't remember the word you used.
It is a form of insanity.
But it was that statement that you made that I was wondering if you would say it again.
Basically, I'm saying that a human being is creating psychologically what they need to adapt to. So we're creating the space junk falling from the sky. We're creating the things that we need to.
Because it's habit.
Because it becomes habit.
That's habit, is looking for it and actually making it when it's not there. Just that literally creating shit.
Exactly. That and well, the habit comes from somewhere, so we can back that up. That comes from a mind that's below the threshold of active recognition. When the mind is below the threshold of active recognition, it feeds the nemesis. One aspect of the nemesis is the way that we think, which leads to the way that we behave. And yes, if it's not active, then it's habitual. It's a part of a cycle, and habit gains momentum. That's why a habit that we've been doing for 20 or 30 years feels so damn difficult to redirect. And oftentimes what people want to do is they want to use their own personal power. They want to use their own energy to try to force habits out. And that can work, but I'm not going to say that that is the most energy efficient dynamic. And I don't know if that will be the best dynamic in terms of like relapsing back into that habit. The way that we'll approach it in this system, I think, will be better in the long run overall.
And then say that again. You said people, at below the recognition are creating. They're creating these situations just out of, I just can't remember what you said just a minute ago.
Out of thin air, basically.
Yeah. And it's just to keep that feeling going because they're so addicted to that. It's just what they're used to. So when there's not a problem, they're just going to create a problem because it needs to be there.
I can see that. That makes sense.
Been my observation.
I think that's a fair observation. Yes. That makes sense to me. The habit, if there's not the elements for the habit, then they psychologically create the elements, maybe without even knowing that, without even being aware of that dynamic. Absolutely. So what this leads to is the nemesis, and then that leads to the 5 destroyers. So the nemesis is when our mind is below the threshold of active recognition. If it's below the threshold of active recognition, you are a kite in the air and something is holding the string to that kite, but it's not you. Because when it's you, that's above the threshold of active recognition. You're aware of your mind and your body and your output and the things that you need to adapt to, especially in the system as we go along. You're keenly aware of what do I need to adapt to in this moment. Does that make sense? Now, this is getting to the root. This gets to the very root of the human species and our human dilemma. So we had, I think it was Marcus Aurelius who is credited with know thyself. Is that who's credited with that? Even though it very likely did not originate with him. But he was probably the most famous person at the time to recite it. So that's how it goes in our society too. A famous person says something and then they get the credit for it, but they know damn well they didn't come up with that. But what does that really mean? So if you ask somebody, know yourself, what does that mean? They'll be like, well, it means know your goals, know what you want in life, right? Well, I wouldn't disclude those things, but what else does know yourself mean? What do you think it means in the context of Qigong? What is know yourself? How about all the hipsters that say we're all one, man? We're all one. We're just, everything is all the same. That's my hipster voice. It's very similar to my caveman voice because they're similar forms of cognition.
It's just the bullshit voice,
It is the
pretty
bullshit
much.
voice. Yeah. We're all one, man. The stars, you're just seeing yourself.
Maybe some people get it when they say that. They just are from California and it sounds like that. Sounds like bullshit. Maybe some people actually are able to answer that question when you ask them. They're
Hmm
not all in one category.
hmm What if know yourself was more than just a conceptual thing? It was more than just the concept of yourself. So what is the self? Start with that. What typically when we talk about the self, what are aspects of the self? Also, this is the ego, aspects of the ego.
I think it's just knowing the direction of your mind. It's being above the level of recognition. That's what know yourself means because you're following following and or choosing the direction of your mind. That's know yourself, the being aware of your body. Just what we talked about when you first started the class. You know, when I said I got in a squat and then I was like, oh, how am I gonna get, I'm gonna need like to push off something to stand up. Like I didn't know my body well enough to know that when I got in that position, what it was gonna feel like. So I didn't know myself. It's just an awareness of the direction of your mind, the totality of your experience in the present moment. That's know yourself in my definition.
That's fair. Yeah. So we have the ego, which is again, this word is used a little bit differently.
Self
Freudian
self concept.
self-concept. Yeah.
Yeah, your self concept, your beliefs.
Your likes, your dislikes, your memories.
Sure.
So all of that is a part of the self. And that's what I would put as the ego part of the self. And again, in this system, we don't declare war on the ego. It just doesn't make any sense because I'm going to have that identity. But the trick is with this system, because we become so present, we become so hyper aware of the moment that we see the aspects of the ego self, but we also see this other aspect of self that is all one, man, because the present moment, if this is an aspect of the self, then paying attention to the outside world is knowing yourself. Right? That makes sense.
As long as it's in balance and it's deliberate,
Well, yeah,
present, then you're knowing yourself because
right.
you're right.
So know thyself can mean to have active recognition of the aspects of the totality of who you are. And when you can see, I'm putting that in air quotes because it's a part of you get a greater perspective of who you really are. And you start to see these aspects individually, but you also see the individual aspects as a part of a whole. And you don't have to declare one and like cling to the other because they're both equally valid. I do have memories. I do have likes. I do have dislikes. I am also the earth having achieved consciousness through a human being. And thereby, by extension, I am the entire universe having achieved consciousness through an expression called the human being, specifically earnest. That's a part of the self. That part of the self gets absolutely no airtime, no attention, no recognition unless the mind is above the threshold of active recognition, because the only way that you can honor and be aware and know that aspect of yourself is to give it your attention. And your attention, as Donna pointed out, is another aspect of yourself. So in the human condition, we have isolated these tiny little things about ourselves. And because all of our focus is there, it has created an attachment to ego, an attachment to identity. Does that make sense? And so now we're identifying with pain dramas, psychological dramas, problems, things, stuff, adoration, bank account, and that leaves out the totality. Does that make sense? So it's an incomplete thing because you have the aspects of the self, the ego self, the characteristics of the human being, but then you have the more total aspects of who we are, which is the whole universe or the whole planet, right? So those are aspects of the human being and also consciousness, because consciousness doesn't age. It's not different. Donna's consciousness is no different than mine. Donna's attention is no different than mine. Once it goes inside her brain, everything changes. Once it's being processed and organized and created into an interpretation of the moment, that snapshot, that's what the brain is doing. It's creating a Polaroid picture of the moment. Donna's Polaroid would be different than my Polaroid, but the camera is the same. The lens can have different aspects to it, but the gist of it is similar. It's a similar dynamic because attention doesn't age, it doesn't change. It's the same for you, it's the same for me. Marcus Aurelius, if his mind was clear and his attention was on a flower, that's the exact same attention that I have when I look at a flower. Of course, the processing of that flower, how it looks, whether it's beautiful, how it feels, that's all unique to the individual. But attention itself is shared. It's a common denominator among the human species. I mean, among all life. When you look at an animal, you can see that attention is the same. That's why we recognize it in an animal. A dog recognizes a dog. Humans can recognize that attention that comes from an animal. And I'm assuming it can recognize that attention from us as well, which is why sometimes animals will befriend humans or befriend other animals, even though in the wild, maybe sometimes they would be have a predator-prey dynamic. Does that make sense?
Yes, but what they're recognizing, the points of attention that they're recognizing still is different. You know, yours and mine are different. You might be recognizing the life force energy of the flower when you look at it. You might be looking at the shadows cast by the flower, or even the color we might see differently. You know, how our processors are different, and they're also influenced differently depending
Yes.
on the totality of our experience at any moment in time, and how focused our attention is, where
Sure.
it's directed.
Yeah, that all makes sense.
How many data points are we using to process this information, and how it's interpreted is different, but
Mhm.
the attention itself is the same.
So at some point in human history, which was topic 1 in these 20 essential topics, the human being went below the threshold of active recognition and they started to act out everything habitually. They started to think, and I mean all day, pretty much. They were just thinking all the time. And that thought led to an imbalance, that led to an attachment, that led to the ego, that led to the expression of ego, which is war and frustration and famine and all of these psychological things that we need to adapt to that we just shouldn't have to. We shouldn't have to be creating war to adapt to. We shouldn't have to adapt to that because we should have never created it in the first place, for example. Does that make sense? So that is the beginning of the mind going below the threshold of active recognition, and attention is always focusing on something. It's focusing on the self, me, I, me, I, which creates other. And then that's where the mind is. The other is wrong, I am right. The other is, a different race, a color, or ethnicity. And so, they're terrible. I'm this ethnicity and this race, so I'm superior. We have other and I. And of course, that leads to the world that we live in today. And that's what creates the destroyers. The destroyers by themselves are not bad. Biology is biology. I mean, it's fine. However, when we're below the threshold of active recognition, one of the deepest, most ingrained habits that we can create will be biological. Does that make sense? So I'll just go ahead and list the destroyers now. So the destroyers come from the nemesis. I don't know why it does that. And then it becomes the destroyers. Did I spell that right? Nemesis, nemesis. So the first destroyer, and again, these are destroyers because they're coming from the nemesis. We'll start with entertainment. This is what happens when the mind is not active in the moment, when it's not engaging the moment. It becomes bored and at odds with the present moment. That is one of the most disrupting aspects to this. I don't want to use the word spirit. I'll use the word the energy body, that flow between us and everything else, because we're all one, man. So it's all connected. So that connection between us. And so entertainment is the result of a mind that is fundamentally bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment, which disrupts spirit or disrupts our energy body and is one of the primary forms of interference. That is what's interfering with everything, is because our mind is simply easily brought to boredom. Does that make sense? Very simple concept, but it's the reason that you see movie stars making $250 million a movie. They get adorned with all of this, people just seem to care about everything that a celebrity has to say. And it's like, why? Like, who the fuck is this person? Like, they made a movie and now all of a sudden, I care about their philosophical views on how people are being treated in these other, it's like, what are we even talking about here? Maybe they're very active in that field and they've given you lots of reason to listen to them. That's a different matter entirely. But in general, the human species gives entertainers way, way disproportional attention. Shayna and I, we like watching CBS Evening News. I like that Nora O'Donnell always finishes with a positive story. Right after the CBS Evening News is Entertainment Tonight. And I have to change that shit. And I just tell Shane, I'm like, if you don't change it, I'm just leaving. Like, you can watch it if you want to. I'm not going to take part in it though, because I don't give a fuck about these celebrities. I don't care who they're marrying. I don't care how they're living. I don't care what yacht they just bought. But in general, our society does, because of being below the threshold of active recognition, the mind has become bored and at odds with the present moment. It doesn't know what's there because it's not accessing what is available, because it's imploding on itself in those two little bubbles, thought and imagination. The mind is collapsing into those two little bubbles. Does that make sense? I know.
Would it be also accurate to say that within your practice, you're not real interested in anybody?
I'm not real interested in anybody.
Well, I'm not trying to quote you. How do you say it? Sometimes you'll say othering, not going to do it. Just not interested.
I don't other as much as maybe other people do. Yeah.
So it kind of stops you from being engaged really with people. That's a question. That's a question.
I would say that I'm engaged less. And when I do engage, I engage deliberately and above the threshold of active recognition. I go to work, so I have to engage with people. I'll be going to school, so I have to engage. So I don't think that I disengage with people, but because I'm not constantly seeking entertainment, I find myself not in the same areas as other people. I don't find myself in bars. I don't find myself in shows and concerts, and there's nothing wrong with these things. And I may go to a concert someday, but I'm not seeking entertainment because my mind is bored or at odds with the moment. And one of the reasons that there does have some separation with people is because the common form of cognition doesn't want to just sit there and be blissfully connected to the present moment and need nothing else from it. That is extremely uncommon. So that does put me at odds with people sometimes because people just want to talk. And I don't really just, I'm meeting somebody tomorrow and all we're going to do the whole time is just talk. Because if you don't talk, then people are like, what's wrong with this person? They don't really want to hang around you. And now you have a social thing. And so I'll put on my deliberate folly suit and I'll talk and we'll catch up.
But
And
that's
yeah.
still your present moment. And
It
you
is.
still get this awesomeness opportunity to actively engage deliberately, however you choose to do. That is your moment. Why not enjoy it? Again, that's a question. Why not just be there and enjoy it? You're choosing to go, you're meeting them.
I
Yeah,
think
so
he
I will.
enjoys it. I just don't think it's necessarily in the
Exactly.
same way that everybody else
I
does.
won't.
I mean,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
definitely puts you on an island for
It does.
sure,
Yeah.
but
That's a choice. That's a choice. That's a choice. It's all
No, I
choice.
would say it's a dynamic as well. It is a choice, but it's also a dynamic. When you have things moving this way, right? Then we'll say that's the mood of the world, moving towards entertainment needs, moving. I need Netflix. I need to go party. I need to hang out. I need to catch up. I need friends. I need this. I need this. And people are trying to fill a void because the mind is bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment. And so it needs new stimuli, it needs fun, it needs these types of things because it can't get it from its environment because it's not used to that. And so what Donna's pointing out is a dynamic that the minds of society are going this way, but the minds of the practitioner will start to go a different direction. You can't go down an insane path if you're operating in a sane fashion or you're operating with optimal efficiency. Does that make sense?
Let me maybe clarify and I'll let you continue on. I am not trying to confuse the situation. I guess sometimes I bring myself into it and it is a bit early here for me, but just to clarify, I absolutely understand what you're saying. And Principle of the Hawk is definitely in place for me. And I understand that that's what you're using, which is probably, I'm sorry, that is more than likely a principle that you use with regard to self-awareness and othering. Absolutely, I get that. I don't need to be tending other people's gardens, tend my own. That's the space I want to hold and create. And now I'm losing my train of thought, and I did have the thought there. But this is how I, tend myself. It's that awareness that you were talking about earlier. But I did forget my thought. Give me just a second.
I think
we're
Don,
talking about why
And
not
so-
participate with other
So,
people.
right.
I'll finish.
Yeah.
So this leads into your destroyers.
Mhm.
And I fully understand those. And I guess all I'm saying is I understand those destroyers and I will work with that knowledge and information for myself. But it is not about, well, other people need to do this because they've got to be out. They're just, not, aware. They're just out there seeking. I get that. But these 5 destroyers are going to be a place for me to become aware. I don't need to wonder what everybody else is doing with them, even though, yes, we know that. But it's about us being aware of these things. That's what we're studying here. It's not about, well, we're getting this going because that'll just make us better than everybody else that out there is, that thing. So I it's hard for me to get the words out. I see the
Yeah.
look on your face. I think you know what I'm trying to say, though. You were
Maybe.
describing
He's
what we
not
do
declaring
before
war,
we're
he's
aware.
just showing that the train of momentum in habitual repetitive things.
Yeah,
So
and
you
I'm
can
aware of it.
explain it.
Absolutely.
I
I'm
know
aware of
you're
it.
aware of it. I don't think he's declaring war on it. I think he's just saying that he has to explain it so that you can be more self-aware to see if you're being pulled by that destroyer or whether you're working with it.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah,
all.
and maybe just the term we tend to do this. This is typically what we as human beings tend to do.
No, I wouldn't. I would no, see that tend to do, I would be careful because that would almost sound like it's a principle that the human species has to go through the suffering. And there's no principle in the universe that says that human beings have to become so at odds with the present moment that they need to fill that void with all of these myriads of entertainment. So I began by saying that the 4 destroyers, the 5 destroyers, they're not by themselves destroyers. Like there's nothing wrong with entertainment. The mind can be entertained by a wide variety of things. But what becomes the cancer in the human experience is a mind that is below the threshold of active recognition. So it's doubly below. It's double weighted below the threshold of active recognition. And if you're below the threshold of active recognition, the only way that you can operate is habitually. That you're going to be acting on memory. You're going to be acting on the momentum of habit, which is why habits feel so difficult to stop. It feels so difficult to quit a habit because it has gained so much momentum in the human experience. Now, the 5th destroyer is human momentum. That's what we're dealing with. That's the one of the thing that I need to adapt to the most in my life experience is the 5th destroyer, because the momentum of human unconsciousness, human species, not us, them, they, that, I don't, that's petty. I'm talking about the species of the human being is so at odds with the present moment. And what creates at odd? Below the threshold of active recognition. So because we're below the threshold of active recognition, the average mind, the common mind, common cognition, what is most represented, it's not us versus them. I hope someday when we talk about common cognition, we're talking about things like hydrostasy, but I don't think I'll see that in my lifetime, anything like that. So because the mind is below the threshold of active recognition, it can only be feeding habit. And since the mind is at odds with the present moment, it tries to fill that void with it. And then, of course, the destroyers start to overlap because sex is very entertaining. You know, drama is very entertaining. So they start to find these threads and they start to work together. The destroyers do. So because the mind is bored and at odds with the moment, it tries to fill that void with habitual behavior. And society itself is like a river going towards that habitual behavior. That's the 5th destroyer. Does that make sense? And so if I don't go that direction, I am fundamentally putting myself on an island. Now I can deliberate folly all day long so that I don't get, you know, weird labels and stuff. And maybe I still do, I don't know, but deliberate folly is the way that I will interact with other human beings. And I'll explain all that when we get into hunting power, because deliberate folly is a part of the hunting power. And this is all assuming that a person doesn't leak power. They shouldn't even touch on any of these subjects, anything that we're talking about, if we're still leaking power, because this is totally inaccessible. This is hydrostasy stuff where a person has created space in the overall amount of thinking. So when we talk about, so that's the first destroyer that I've described, is the entertainment destroyer. Because the mind is below the threshold of active recognition, it can't find, it is very difficult for that mind to find simple appreciation for the opportunity to exist. It is very difficult for that mind to find quality in the present moment because it's not paying attention to the present moment. It needs some sort of extra stimuli, a vacation, you know, a big mountain to look at, a person that they find attractive next to them. These are the things that the mind seeks in today's society. And that's a river, because there's so many people seeking similar things that the moment you do something different, you are fundamentally going into a different direction on an island, very likely with very few people. Does that make sense? And it's not good or bad. It's not saying that the river is evil or that they're a bunch of bums or anything like that. It's just what is most common and what is not that common. This practice is not that common. I can assure you that in a city of 3 million people, 0 other than myself are holding the axis of hydrostasy in their present moment while they do everything else. I can assure you that the second attention is not represented in the human species today in any significant amount. And so any significant amount. Is there can't be that many doing what we're doing. Now there probably are, out of 7 billion people, quite a few, but spread out all over the planet to the point where we still create islands for ourselves. And it is the way it is. It shouldn't be a problem when we're in hydrostasy though, because we're already able to adapt all of these different things. So no, I won't want to go to the clubs every weekend. No, I don't want to travel because I'm not a sightseer. I don't want to just look at something and be like, well, that's great. I'm not interested in those things. I'm not interested in luxury. I'm not interested in, and like Shayna said, our business doesn't make a lot of money because I don't fucking care about money. I don't even really like the stuff at all. So it is difficult for me to focus on that factor when it's just not something I'm interested in one iota. Right? That's why my career will be where I make my income, because all I need is enough to go out as what I got going in. I just need balance in that dynamic. And what I need is very low. So I'm never going to need that much. Does that make sense?
Just
That's-
do what you love. Everything's going to be fine. Just do what you love.
I don't disagree. See, you don't have to convince me of that. That's the funny thing, is like, you don't have to convince me. I live on this island, it's
No,
okay.
I've just never understood your propensity to declare war on money. And I'm just giving you shit right now. I mean, I love you, but you just say this every once in a while and it just cracks me up. You don't need to fucking worry about it. Just go do you, and you're beautiful, and just go write your
Well,
books and be you, and go do your thing.
It's not just money. It would be all of these different aspects of society. I just chose that one. Luxury. I have absolutely no interest in luxury. I don't want luxury cars. I don't want luxury living. I don't want anything like that. I'm not interested in Now, the reason I'm mentioning that isn't to say, Ernest, I'm mentioning that because in context to the conversation and what you were just talking about, it puts you on an island. When you have 300 million people who are capitalistic and are focused on making money, you will be that one person sitting over there saying, I don't want people to pay for my time. I'm one of the only people I know that will stand here and tell you that I just don't think that's a thing. I think we're making shit up when we say you need to pay me for my time. My time is important. No, it's not. You just made that up. There's no such thing as time. So you're not paying for you might pay for a service. You might pay for someone's expertise or their knowledge, but
It's
Jerry,
the way that our
it's not the
society is
same.
constructed.
It's the
It's
way the
not something that's inherently of value to pay somebody for their time. It's the way our
Right.
society is. While
Exactly.
you were speaking about this and explaining your definitions, I was thinking about the king, like the king in Hamilton. I was thinking of the king and the court jester, bring somebody in to entertain me. If he doesn't make me laugh, off with his head. And that is a clear, it's not inherent. People say, oh, there's always been wars and there's always been power struggles and there's always been, so therefore it is the nature of the human being. And that's not necessarily so.
not,
It's
no.
the nature of the way that some people achieved power and then society became constructed that way, and therefore the destroyers gained momentum and power over time because of that, everyone's agreement to that construct. It's not necessarily, because you're proving it by changing your lens of attention and changing your focus, which changes the island you exist on and changes your wants and desires. So it's not the nature of human beings to do that. It's just what society has become. When Columbus discovered America, he didn't discover it, it already existed and people lived here. They came representing the queen who wanted more power and more land, and they took it from people who were existing in a more balanced society. So it's not necessarily the nature of human beings. It is just the way that the destroyers have gained momentum. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And
I get it.
and through this practice, you start to dissolve the destroyers. And when
For
you are,
yourself. And then
because
you
you stop feeding
see
them,
things through a different lens,
and you can change your behavior.
don't make the beliefs that, well, everybody does this,
Exactly.
so And of course, Jerry, it's all individual about,
Mhm.
that's what Ernest described earlier in this explanation. He's just trying to do a short review of what things will pull our attention based on their habit and momentum. And you can choose how much you want to participate or not participate. And you're managing your own mind. So those selections of things are yours
Mhm.
individually. Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to, so when we talk about, I'll touch on this 1 second and then we'll go into the other aspects of the destroyers. But specifically when we talk about money, when we talk about monetary systems, when we talk about these things, they are the derivative of generations and generations of the destroyers. That's the reason that the world looks at money the way that it does, because in a capitalistic system, you have to have haves and have-nots. It's impossible to have a system the way that we have it and not create that separation, because you can't have somebody having $365 million and still have enough for everybody else. There's only so much, right? $1 billion, right? Yeah, we're getting into the billions now, $350 billion, and still have enough for everyone else. It's disproportionate. And the number one reason, every economics model in the world has to account for the human being's tendency to be self-centered. The focus on I is one of the primary accomplishments, in air quotes, of the 4 destroyers. And when you are dissolving the destroyers, it will put you on an island to some extent. However, hopefully, if we're doing this and we're actually doing our practice, that won't matter. It doesn't matter to me that I'm on an island that people would look at and say, that's no fun. I mean, they would. I know a lot, maybe not everybody, right, Jerry? Because I can't put some people would look at my lifestyle and just be like, oh, Ernest, that's so nice that you go on walks and that you don't need TV and that you don't need these things necessarily. You can find joy and entertainment looking out a window. That's cool. Maybe, there are some people who would think that's nice. I don't care. It's irrelevant to me because it's just not a factor. I don't other. So when I talk about the destroyers, one of the fundamental things that we're talking about is over time, over generations, we have equaled the 5th destroyer, which is the momentum of human society. And it has a tendency to be self-centered, extremely so. You cannot make an economics model. There's enough toilet paper for everybody, folks. What happened in the pandemic? People focused on themselves. They were very self-centered and they hoarded and they didn't allow enough for everybody. That's because the human being is fundamentally dysfunctional. It's dysfunctional in the way that it connects and collaborates with its own species. So on one hand, we have fundamentally dysfunctional as a result of the 5 destroyers. On the other hand, we have a person who is practicing an awareness practice that dissolves the 5 destroyers, dissolves the need for the 5 destroyers, and puts them back into the proper context in the totality of the human experience. Those are 2 different islands, folks. Like, I don't care how you slice it. I don't care how you look at it. I'll do one-on-ones with folks as they get into the hydrostasy section and they're noticing my life is going a different direction than the stream of the 5th destroyer. And at that point, though, we're not leaking power. So we're not focusing on ourselves and others. So why should I care about that? And I think that's the biggest thing is sometimes people assume that because I say that I'm on an island or that I'm not going with that stream of chatter, that stream, 90% self-talk all the time. I'm fundamentally not doing that anymore. So I have put myself on an island of less thought. I put myself on an island of more awareness of the present moment. How many people do you know that are paying attention to the present moment at all times as a part of their ordinary cognition and attention? Not too many, probably. So it's statistically an anomaly, and that will create a larger anomaly in your life experience. But at this point in the practice, right now, we're just talking about it intellectually. Maybe not everybody's practicing hydrostasy, but when we are practicing it, being on that island is fine. It's no problem. So there's no declaration of war, as you put it. Like, I'm fine on my island. I don't, so people can come and hang out if you want to, but otherwise I'm good. Like, my island is my island. I've created it how I want it to be. But there are certain aspects of insanity that I just will not participate in. Sorry, not sorry. Like I can't do it. There's no deliberate folly in the world that will make me do some of the things that people are doing in the world below the threshold of active recognition. I could care less. Or excuse me, I couldn't care less. That's the proper way to say that. Now let's look at the other destroyers and how, so remember, the destroyers come from the nemesis. The nemesis is a mind that is operating below the threshold of active recognition. They are unaware of their outside environment. They're still processing it because the mind processes below the threshold of active recognition at all times. We're looking for a balance. Very few people are walking around aware of their inside environment. Very few people are aware of their cognition as it's occurring. And very few people are aware of every breath they take throughout the day. Embodying these four aspects will fundamentally put a person on an island compared to the destroyers, because it's an opposite dynamic occurring. And it is the way that it is. And if you're practicing, it shouldn't be a problem. I could see it coming up every now and then, though. I could see somebody, I went to Thanksgiving dinner and I didn't find all the racist jokes funny. It's like, well, no wonder. That's okay. You don't have to find all the family racist jokes funny. But I could see somebody, feeling at odds with the family and like, what do I do? So I could see myself, mentoring somebody through that situation. But ultimately in hydrostasy, we're happy with the island that we're creating because we're not bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment. So what's the problem? There is no problem. I'm not adapting to my own psychology. That's insane. I already have to adapt to my biology in situations that are beyond my ability to directly influence. So I have plenty to adapt to. I'm not going to create my own psychological adaptation requirement. That makes no sense. So we have entertainment as one of the primary destroyers in the human experience, and we see the momentum it's gained. We see the hold that it has, the grip that it has in our society. Is there any reason that we would find, people being dismembered and killed and all of this drama? And why do we find all of this entertaining? I can almost remember in high school when I was watching, I think it was like one of these Jackass movies, and I'm like, okay, I am laughing at this. Why? Why is ejecting this person in a porta potty funny to me? What has happened to my mind that I find these types of things entertaining? And again, I'm not declaring war on the people who do find it entertaining. I just no longer really, I'm just not interested in it anymore. It has lost its interest. Yeah, Ida, you're putting yourself on an island that your friends call the 15th century. And that's okay. At this point in our practice, we should be comfy with our island. So it's not a problem. It's not us versus them. It's not they should be. That's the principle of non-interference. I can't tell another person what they should or shouldn't be doing because it all happens in our own time according to the totality and our own temperament, our own life experience. So no, I give principles. I'll give examples of practice. I'll tell you where I'm at and what I'm navigating, but I'm not going to tell anybody to do a damn thing. If they ask the questions, then they'll get the answers. But otherwise, I'm an openly closed book. Okay, so we have entertainment as one of our destroyers. And we have society itself, social factors. Why am I going to wear a necktie? Why do we wear things that cut off our circulation? Why would a woman wear a wired bra? When you know that it's cutting off the circulation, your lymphatic system isn't flowing, your blood isn't flowing as well. It's just not good for your body to wear high heels. It's not good for my body to put a tight necktie around my neck and try to pretend that that's comfortable. That's stupid to me. I don't find that to be an intelligent thing for a species to do, to wrap a necktie around its tie and pretend that it's comfortable. No. So that puts me at odds. It puts me on an island. If I'm invited to the White House by the president and it's a black tie event, sorry, not sorry, but I can't go because I'm not putting on a necktie. I have boundaries. And one of my boundaries is I will never wear a necktie or high heels. What are we doing to our bodies that it's so socially acceptable to destroy ourselves? That makes no sense. And that's society for you. That's what the social destroyer will create. It will create norms out of this insanity to where it just seems normal that we should be so concerned with entertainment, where we fit in socially and all of our social factors. We are social creatures, but that doesn't have to become a source of attachment and suffering and a box that we put ourselves in. That's insane. So we have our entertainment, social, and this is the biggest one, and they all play together. By the biological. So the biological destroyer. This is the habits that are around your biology will be the most difficult habits to allow them to dissolve on their own. It does take time for things to dissolve on their own. So this system, when we get into hunting power, it's not a quick fix. You will always be hunting power if you start. I'll be 110 years old and I'll be observing. I'll be stalking myself so I can see what habits are coming up. So I can see what thoughts are starting to get out of balance. So I can see what behaviors are starting to acclimate themselves to the world around, or not, or vice versa. But I'll be aware of those things as they're occurring. That's the key. And then what do we do, Donna? According to our conversation earlier, we adapt. We adapt to those things. I see that I'm starting to develop a habit. That's fine. But because I'm so hyper aware, I can redirect and I can interrupt. That's basically what we're looking to do. Habit has continuity and momentum because it has consistency. Just by doing this practice, we start to break up the continuity. We're adding something to the experiment that wasn't there before, and it's called hydrostasy and Qigong, a mind practice. And so that's automatically breaking up the continuity of the habit. And so that continues, and then it just chips away and chips away and chips away. And then one day you're there and you feel that this habit is pulling you out of your center, and you just redirect and it's no problem. I'm just not going to do it. I don't need to do it. I don't have
I think
any
that's
more.
the key right there. And it coincides with what Jerry was saying before. Just do what makes you happy. Like, do what feels good. And I think that I have found that the more I practice, the only time I moved from what you characterize as one phase into another phase is that wasn't because you convinced me, and wasn't because I was trying to achieve something. It was because it felt better to practice than it feels not to. So, and it takes time. Like I said, when I was going out the door, I felt that I was focusing too much on what time is it? I have to leave by a certain time in order to get there at a certain time. Then I'm going to have parking in Brooklyn. That's a whole thing. I'd rather find street parking than find a garage. And then I felt what that felt like to be moving away from my practice. I was still aware of my breath, sort of, and my feet on the ground. I did segment my moving out the door into my car, but I lost a lot of points of attention because my attention was focused on those factors. And I realized I cannot plan for those any further. I'm on my way out the door. I'm going to get in the car, and everything will evolve the way it's going to evolve. I already have all of the things that I need to know. I already have all the data. I have the addresses, I have the place, and what happens on the way and once I get there is going to unfold. So where is my mind now? And let me focus on it. It didn't feel good when I was leaving the house going, wait a minute, drop your practice and go through your list again in your head. No, forget about the list. You did the list. You probably did the list too many times, as a matter of fact. So anyway, the point was it feels better to be in practice. I adapt better when I'm practicing. When I start to feel the pull towards my habitual ways of problem solving, a trip to Brooklyn to go to a party, which where's my joy when I'm trying to see what all the problems could be and beat them. I already decided those things, and now I'm in I'm doing this now. Where is my mind? Like it felt better to go back to my practice than it did to leave it. That's the only way I moved through this practice with you, is because I noticed that it felt better to do it than not do it. Not to avoid all the destroyers.
Right.
Oh, there I go doing that again. It was in
Mhm.
hindsight that I would go back to my practice and go, oh, that's why you didn't listen to your inner voice, or you weren't, or you were being pulled by problem solving, or it, but it was in hindsight that I noticed it, or that I felt the pull away that brought me back.
hmm
It's
And there are
really
s- and there are certain feelings about the hydrostatic practice and Qigong in general that maybe some people haven't ever accessed before. So they don't really know what it feels like to be balanced, focused, aware, relaxed, connected, vibrant, with the second attention active. So once you dip your toes in those waters, that is so much more rewarding than temporary satisfaction through alcohol and naked dancers or whatever people are into these days. Do you see what I mean? So yeah, the feeling.
or even meditation. I used to,
Oh
my
yeah.
spiritual practice was really in its own compartment. So
Mhm.
I achieved the levels that I would desire to feel. I felt more freedom, I felt more ease, I felt more connection. But as soon as I left whatever sphere I was in, it all went away. I had to go back to my yoga class, or back to my meditation practice, or back to my Reiki in order to feel those things. I didn't know how to, I didn't recognize that I was putting my points of attention specifically somewhere, and that's what was giving me um, the ease and peace and the desired space I wanted to be in. And then I could do that while I was going to work, or while I was at work, or while I'm in the emergency room. It never occurred to me. I thought I just need to do more of those practices in order to feel more of that. And I didn't break it down to the degree that you did, and recognize the principles at play so that I could carry it with me through my daily life.
hmm And one of the best feelings that we could talk about is self-awareness, the impeccable self, and not just like we talked about the ego, the construct of self, but the moment itself, the environment that we're in, the soup that we're creating, our bubble of perception. Those are all aspects of ourself that, if we're aware of in the present moment, feels immeasurably powerful. I would say, though, just as a caveat, one phrase that I will never say is do what feels good. One of the reasons is, if the destroyers are leading you, then the activities within the destroyers will feel good. And then before you know it, you're burying your head in the sand, pretending that the world isn't spinning, and that, you know, if you don't see it, then you didn't attract it or whatever.
It was do what feels good, and with these principles at play.
Okay, I'm good with that. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so the other destroyers. So one way to recognize these as destroyers is I could talk for 4 hours every day for the next 20 days about the dysfunction that are in all of these dynamics, the dysfunction in our social constructs, our biological interaction, the entertainment destroyer. And one of the biggest ones, and it does fit with the other three, remember, they all play together, are the habits we've created already, especially the ones that have a lot of momentum. And then the fifth destroyer, which is the secret one, the one that you can never, ever, ever touch or interact with or do anything to directly, is human momentum. There was a time where if I were saying any of the things that I'm saying, I would have been going so far against the human momentum that they probably would have killed me. I would be speaking out against the church or the hierarchy, and I wouldn't be able to say the things that I'm saying today. So that's how strong the fifth destroyer can be. If you go against it too much, you can get burned at the stake type of deal. Does that make sense? So these are the 5 destroyers. heretic. Yeah.
I
So
don't know
if
you spelled it wrong. You would have been called a heretic because you were
heretic,
against religion.
yes. And that would put me on a different island. Definitely a different island. So when the mind, and this is the number one thing that one of the number one things that we're working with here, is a mind that is either above or below the threshold of active recognition. Other people might call this conscious awareness. Here's the thing. The human species evolved to the point where they could become self-aware. That creates a separation. That separation can be held in context with the overall whole. It wasn't. Because of the thought, because of the way that we divide things up, the separation became a point of emphasis. And it created more separation and more division to the point where we could identify with aspects of the overall whole and not the whole itself. So at some point, the mind became incapable or unwilling to hold the divisible and the indivisible both as truth. Does that make sense? The divisible would be the different aspects of our life experience, of our life situation, our psychology, our biology, our sociology, the interaction with our other people in our society. And then we have the wholeness. We're all one, man. Well, that's true. Are you aware of yourself? The totality of yourself. That can become a part of your second attention. And that is know thyself. That is impeccable self-awareness. You're aware of your thoughts. You're aware of your words that you're saying out loud. So you're aware of the voice. And 2 degrees, but when I say totality, I actually do mean totality. You're looking at it from a broader perspective. And so you see it as a whole forest rather than individual trees. But it's both. You're not clinging and attaching to one or the other, and you're not, so we're all one, man. And then people, they want to discredit the individuality of the experience, that it's not real, it's an illusion. No, it's both. I can assure you that the individual semi-truck that's approaching you at 75 miles an hour is real. But I can also assure you that that semi-truck is a part of a larger forest of trucks and trees in this analogy. Does that make sense? And you hold them both because you see them both. That's seeing, is a broader perspective where you can hold opposites both as truth and put them together to create a balance is power, third thing. Does that make sense? So we're doing one of the most fundamental things that we could do as a human being, and that is to be consciously aware of ourselves. Self-recognition in the present moment is the most powerful thing that a human being can do. It's also the most powerful thing any animal on earth can do. And it does appear that there are other animals who are aware of themselves individually and collectively simultaneously. We were just watching a thing about killer whales, how they'll swim together to create a wave, and that wave will knock the seal off the ice. That is very intelligent, coordinated group behavior. And they have this call that they do, and it tells the other whales which approach to hunting that they're gonna, that's communication, that's language. So we have language, we have communication, we have complex behaviors, but their psychology is still all 100% towards food and breeding. The human beings isn't, because we have our food and for the most part our breeding taken care of. So we can do other things with our psychology that all evolves self-awareness. So with artificial intelligence, people are scared of artificial intelligence if it becomes self-aware, because now it's aware of itself in the stream of everything else. Human beings became self-aware. At some point in our history of cognitive evolution, we could see our own mind, we could see our own attention, we could see our own consciousness. And when I say see, I'm talking about the assembly, the perception of. Does that make sense? The interpretation. We're always just seeing an interpretation. Does that make sense? And so with this system, from the very beginning, from day one, we start to interject active conscious awareness into our life experience, which is where the human being became something very special. But of course, we lost touch with that because of all of the thought. And from the thought became below the threshold of active recognition. Below the threshold of active recognition allowed these destroyers. And this is just a way of talking about it, by the way. You know, when I talk about this is just a way of categorizing information so that I can, it's a way of understanding. It's not completely literal. So it's just a way of looking at things, a way of understanding what is going on with these dynamics. And now in our society, these 5 destroyers have pretty much everybody by the throat. Whether they know it or not, they are being suffocated by their own cognition below the threshold of active recognition. And what's ironic is some of the things that take us above the threshold of active recognition, we love the most. We love that flow state that we create in sports. We love romantic situations where the thought just goes aside and we connect and we're present and we're, you know, with that person. These are all the experiences that people are chasing, but they don't realize that you don't chase it, you create it, you generate it. Does that make sense? And so these 5 destroyers, without this system or something similar to it that puts a person into active recognition, they are being destroyed by the 5 destroyers. Biologically, we have cancers and all of these things that we're doing to ourselves because we forget about input output. We forget that every single thing that we're putting into our body is going to have a derivative. But people act as if they live forever, or they're going to, and they don't use death as their advisor, and they have no appreciation for the moment as it occurs. They can find appreciation if they look for it. I'm talking about appreciation being a background of your existence, it being there all the time, because Donna, I'll give this later, but that pyramid, that is my practice. One of the bases of my pyramid is appreciation through death as my advisor. I am alive. How can I be bored? Like, what kind of asshole am I to have a trillion times a trillion synaptic connections? I am all one, man. I am the universe. Okay, so what am I going to do with that? I'm going to act like an asshat that's addicted to all of these different aspects of the destroyer. What a pitiful waste of the opportunity to exist. So no, I don't get bored. I'm not at odds with the present moment, because that would be taking it for granted. And the normal cognition does that all the time. It's constantly, what is wanting to be in a different moment? How dare you? You are alive, like you are existing in the moment, but yet you want to be in a different moment. How disrespectful to the opportunity to exist, to just want to get through something. School. I don't want to just look at the graduation date. So I recognize, I see a broader perspective. When I'm 110 years old, I'm probably going to be enrolled in a course. Let's be honest. If the internet still exists, I'm going to be taking a course, whether it's a course on gardening, whether it's a course on astronomy and the stars and naming more planets, I don't know, but I'll be learning something. I've always been learning something. I am learning something right now. I will always be learning something. It's not about the destination. It's about the process of continually learning, adding to your knowledge bank, so that there's only one reason to add to your knowledge, and that's to share it with other people so that the species can grow. And also so you can live better yourself. So I guess that's 2 reasons. So because the mind is not self-aware, because the human being has lost self-awareness, they have access to it at all times. That's the fickle thing, is that we can do that anytime, any way we want to. We can even learn to do it all the time as a part of our hydrostasy practice, that we can be aware of yourself at all times. That's one of the guarantees of this practice before hydrostasy, is impeccable self-awareness, which is also one of my baselines of my pyramid, my mind pyramid, my mind management pyramid. One of those bases is, you know, one of the fundamental ones is appreciation for the moment at hand, the opportunity to exist. And so I find myself, and I'm just going to use myself as an example, where biologically my habits are slowly breaking up. I see them. I don't have to rush it. I'm always going to have habits that are breaking up, habits that have broken up, and habits that need breaking up. It is the way it is. And I have accepted this dynamic and I continue to adapt. Socially, oh shit. I have just shed this destroyer. I am not attached to the same things that society are attached to. I don't need outside sources of entertainment. I'm still entertained, I'm still social, and I'm still biological. These factors in themselves are not destroyers. It's only when they gain momentum as a result of the nemesis, which is a result of being below the threshold of active recognition or conscious awareness of self as it occurs. The habits that I have created already, there's little ones, there's subtle ones, there's less subtle ones, and yet I can see them all breaking up. Like icebergs, they're just breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces, and they're becoming just, I guess, spread so thin that it's almost non-perceptible. And then I'm automatically, by doing all of this, I'm affecting the momentum of humanity. And once these destroyers don't have a grip on you, then there's a lot of freedom in that. Does that make sense? If I explain the destroyers anymore, it's just going to look like I'm tearing on society. Because it is that insane. The things that we're doing as a collective are just absolutely fucking crazy. And there's no other way to word it. Poaching, you know, the way that we're treating forests, the way that we're treating animals. The universe, you know how people say the universe has my back. It wants the best. Well, why just you? Because when you look at the animal kingdom, the universe is trying to kill you. You have to be perennially aware. You have to be present. You have to be cunning. You have to learn. You have to communicate with others in your species so that you can grow and evolve. There's constant challenges. It's not everything is working out for me. It's no, like I have to be careful. I have to be wise. I have to be attentive. I have to be relaxed. I have to be present and powerful in order to change over time and continue to evolve. Because the universe doesn't have your back. Outside of this planet, everything in the universe will kill you. Everything. Space will kill you, stars will kill you, other planets will kill you. So the most appropriate meme is that the universe is trying to destroy you. I know, I'm just kidding also. But it is, I mean, it's a very dangerous world. It's only when we get into these places of luxury that we say, you know, we get into these weird superiority complexes where we think that we're superior to everything else. Why isn't I look at a bird, I look at the cow that's set for slaughter. The universe doesn't have its back. It doesn't look like it does anyway. It looks like it's about to be slaughtered.
I don't necessarily think that the slaughter is the worst part of the whole thing. It's the whole from birth to slaughter.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, maybe we're meant to eat animals, so I can't declare war on that. But
no, and I don't think you should.
Yeah. So how we slaughter, there's, you know, I don't know. That's a whole nother discussion. But I think that
break up the destroyers.
I think that breaking up the destroyers isn't really my goal. I think that operating with intention and attention and managing my mind is my goal. And the destroyers I find dissolve on their own. It's just that having this discussion about what they are helps me to be aware of it as I feel the pull towards something. It has more of an identification of why it has a pull. Most of it is a lot of I still notice habits that I've already created, beliefs, which are habits, ways of thinking. This synapse goes to that synapse, goes to that synapse, just because there's a rutted road there that I've traveled so many times. And it's this practice, and in this practice, that I can feel my pull away from the space and the peace of the practice, and the ability to adapt because I'm operating above the threshold of recognition. When I'm pulled away from it, I can notice my thoughts and go, well, why do I, when I make a statement in my head, some cognition, and I go, where'd that come from? Like, why is that true? That's not necessarily true. I've just thought it my entire life. And so I automatically think that it's a given, and it's not. And I only can see that because I'm practicing something else. I'm not automatically going over that rutted road. I'm popular. I'm managing my mind in a different way so that that habit is noticed, because
Right.
it pulls me away from my practice, and I go, oh, look at that. How many times have I thought that thought and never noticed that it's just completely unnecessary and not valid, and it's not what it's not serving me in what I'm trying to do. It makes me less adaptable, not more.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, like we talked about earlier, what are you ever really adapting to? And then once you have your psychology more balanced, you're no longer adapting to your own psychology, which is what most of this stuff is. The entertainment destroyer is because a person is battling their own psychology of being bored or otherwise at odds with the present moment. Our biology gets so out of whack with the way that we eat, the way that we focus on sex, the way that we focus on those types of things. It gets so out of whack because of the psychological thing that we're creating that now we need to adapt to. We're creating it. So all we need to do is just not create it. And then boom, world changed. And we can still have entertainment, we can still have our biology, but we would just start interacting with everything far more functionally, far more beneficial for the environment, for ourselves, for the continuation of our species. The way the human species is acting right now, we will not make it. I'm just telling you. This isn't a belief. This is just an observational, empirically evident fact. We are in an extinction level event. So over time, we're going to lose more and more species on Earth. We already know that what is causing it is a secondary issue, but the climate is changing to the point where even more species are going to continue to go extinct faster than we can have new ones. We are going to have to interact with a moment in human history, in the human story, where we say, look, we either change the way we do things or we will cease to exist. One of the reasons that this isn't a thing on people's mind, one of the reasons is religion. Religion takes this element away. It will say, no, humans will always exist because the universe has your back, or God has your back, or we're going to resurrect in heaven. And so you have a continuation factor, which now you don't need to use death as your advisor because you have a guaranteed continuation factor. Yeah. So take that with whatever it's worth. But ultimately, Don is correct. So, and that's kind of where I'll leave this particular discussion, is the Qigong practice is a mind intention practice that will bring a person above the threshold of active recognition. We call this conscious awareness of self, period. That's pretty much all we're doing. And everything will take care of itself. That's the theory of non-interference. We don't need to interfere. We don't need to declare war on the destroyers. I don't need to have a problem that I don't want to go out, and I'm not social the way that other people are social because I'm not chasing stuff. I'm fine. Like what I'm doing with my cognition, most people couldn't even imagine. So I don't need it. It has dissolved. So that brings me to, I'll save this whiteboard. And I'll start mentioning this more as we go along with these 20 topics, because we're almost done. So we'll be into the enemies of knowledge. The first enemy of knowledge shouldn't be a big surprise, but it's distraction. And what I mean from distraction is distracted from self-awareness. That is the biggest thing, the biggest event that can happen to an animal or anything, any living thing, is to become self-aware. That's an event. That's a big deal. And our species is wasting it. Just absolutely wasting. And if I were an alien species looking at us, I'd be like, fuck, like they're so close to just completely wasting the opportunity to be self-aware and to evolve with self-awareness. The human species is changing over time, but we're not changing in a way that's going to make us more adaptable. We've seen that. We see that with the pandemic. We've seen that with other things. The average human being is not that adaptable because they're clinging and attaching to the destroyer elements because it's all they know. And again,
Well, and our
yes.
society doesn't really adapt to certain situations either. A pandemic is not meant for a capitalistic society.
No, it's not really meant for any society. Like nobody wants a pandemic, but again, biology, we're a species. And how did we
I'm just
get to
saying
that
in
point?
terms of like functioning, the society is people, that's their fear. They're not going to have enough money to live because of pandemic cut off certain things. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It
but I-
is moving kind of quickly because we did have an Ebola crisis that could have easily been the same as the COVID crisis. And it was, we did adapt. I just don't think it's common knowledge, but there was elegant response for that. And there wasn't for COVID. And there wasn't really a big gap of time. I mean, they're good measure, they're good markers, and I'm just picking them because you just spoke about it. But the time between Ebola in Liberia and COVID wasn't very long, and we lost. We went in the wrong direction as a society pretty quickly, globally, pretty quickly since then, in our collaboration and co-creating our experience. We're definitely devolving in
There's
many
no such
ways.
thing as devolving. I'm just going to say that though. Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you mean by that. Yes.
And in adaptation, in poor adaptation.
We are destroying ourselves as a species. Yes. Because of the lack of adaptation, because our ability to adapt is being compromised by our attachments and our narrow focus on the aspects of self, my likes, my dislikes, what I want, who I think I am. All the traps of thinking are
Me,
excellent.
mine,
Me, I, me. Yeah,
me and mine. This
me
is
and mine.
mine.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And which leads to othering. And that's not what I mean by self-awareness. Self-awareness is we're all one, man. So being aware of this wall is being aware of myself. Being aware of the bubble of perception as it expands is being aware of myself. That's what I mean by impeccable self-awareness. Is it total? No, I'm not aware of every single thing in my environment. That's weird. But I am aware of all the aspects of myself, the total forest, which is infinite. So now here are the axis of hydrostasy. And this is where I will stop delivery of the practice. And we'll get to this with one of our last topics, but I'm just going to introduce it now because very soon I'll be delivering exactly what my practice is. If Mike were to drop out of the sky and say, Ernest, where's your mind at the clinic? It would be this. And so one, I still have the 4 directions established. And this isn't the pyramid, so I'll make this a little bit different than the pyramid, and I'll show you the pyramid another day. But within my 4 directions, here, I'll erase the number because it's within the 4 directions. My practice is always within the 4 directions, and I introduced that in day 1 in Qigong, is the 4 directions. So guess what? I'm still doing that. However, I'll just start with breath. I, throughout the day, am expressing what I call, and I got this from Dan Brule in his book, Just Breathe, because it's a good description. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. The breath aspect of my 4 directions are the 3 convergences. So the 3 convergences of breath is awareness of the breath, physical relaxation, and breathing with the least amount of accessory muscle tension to perform the breath. So for the most part, throughout the day, my breathing is very balanced, imperceptible to another person usually, and smooth. And this, I'll be 110 years old, and I will say that it's a little smoother than yesterday. It's a little, has a little bit more momentum than it did yesterday. And as I continue to practice, it will have more tomorrow and the next day. So this isn't a finished dynamic. The 3 convergences of breath is an ongoing convergence. It gets smoother, it gets more effortless, you gain more awareness, and you get even more physical relaxation. Physical relaxation will be a result of the Qigong practice because we'll introduce posture training, and then we'll introduce Qigong, and then eventually we'll introduce a way to interact with food. This will be the alchemy aspect of hunting power. So there isn't, and I am very loose with the word alchemy, but we are working with chemical, mineral, and we're transforming something to something else. So it does kind of look like that. We're actually using that word in a very literal sense, but it is a real sense. So I'm okay with it.
Having self-awareness is being aware of your biology and the fluctuations in it. So,
Mhm.
you know, what you put in it and on it and around it
You will notice it.
matters. It's an alchemy is happening. So
Yes.
you're
Well,
just become more aware of it.
yes, alchemy is happening if it's changing. And it will change as long as you stay above the threshold of active recognition.
It changes when you stay below the level of
That's true.
recognition.
Just not in a
It
beneficial
doesn't
way.
change in a way that serves you.
Right. Or serves the 5th destroyer or the 5th element, which is the human momentum, the human collective. Us doing our practice is breaking the continuity of the human collective. Just not probably, it's like throwing a pebble at a freight train though, but it is what it is. I threw my pebble. That's all I got to say. I'm out. All right, so the 3 convergences of breath is one of my 4 directions as I talk to you right now. Of course, I'm in situational mindfulness right now, so I also have attention on my throat. That's how the smoothness of breath occurs, is because I'm aware of words as I talk. So the second direction, which outside and inside is kind of blurred because of proprioception. But outside is proprioceptive bubble of perception. So as I go throughout my day, and this is what I mean by the body and the inside and the outside will collaborate. That's why it's an axis. But I guess I'm starting with the outside rather than it would have made more sense, I guess, to start with the inside and then work out. But I guess I'll start with the outside and work in. But the outside, what I'm doing with my mind is in a spherical sense, I'm expanding and occupying my bubble of perception. We start doing that in day 1 of Qigong, and it will develop as we continue to go along to the point where you can consciously expand your bubble of awareness. You're aware of more, never all. All is a very arrogant thing to say. I find it very arrogant for a human to say that the universe has my back. What about the whale? What about that woolly or that little, what's the food of the Antarctica? It's the seal. Damn, that poor seal. Every killer whale has to eat 6 seals a day, and they're in pods of 14. That's a lot of fucking seals every single day. So the universe is doing its thing. It's not necessarily this force, because some people have just replaced the word God with universe, and it's a new religion. It's a new way of looking at the same thing. And it's really not even that new. That's actually quite old. But okay, so I have awareness of my body in space and time. I just haven't talked about my body. I've talked about space and time. That's the outside. Does that make sense? And that's one of the simultaneous directions of attention that are held. The reason it's so easy to hold is that proprioception involves your body and space and time. So when you put those two together, you get your body in space and time. Talk about impeccable self-awareness. You are aware of your body in space and time at all times with the final technique of hydrostasy. You can't get any more self-aware than that. So I should have started with inside because it just makes more sense. But inside equals whole body attention via three treasures. The three treasures is from Tai Chi. So I'm borrowing the three treasures from Tai Chi because it's an excellent way to approach body awareness. Lower, middle, upper Dantian leads to Qi, Jing, and Shen. And you can feel your whole body energetically. You feel it. It's not abstract, ideological, we're just talking about shit. You feel it. You feel your body, you feel your energy body. It's there. I call it abstract because I might not be able to prove it to Donna. Not yet. Not with our current limitation and instrumentations and stuff, you know. So as far as you guys know, the only way that you can know if I'm practicing really is by those four indications. I'll write those down too before we go, and then we can leave it at that. Okay. And now my fourth is cognition. And this is the yummy one. This is what makes everything just so worthwhile. And this is why I don't mind my island. I don't need to go drinking. I don't need to go do all of these, although I can. That's freedom. If Donna wants to come over and have some wine, fine, I'll have a little wine. I probably won't like it, but I'll try it. Or maybe I will like it. I don't know. But the freedom is to have wine or not have wine and still feel free. Or to have blank and not have blank and still feel free. I don't want you to think it's just about wine. So my cognition is the second attention, or the abstract, or artist's edge. Or there's so many ways to talk about this, so I'll just leave it at that. But and we start practicing this in warrior training, where one of our techniques is to pay attention to the silence behind the sound. Michael, you're familiar with this. You've talked about this before. It's something that we do in yoga, shavasana. We want to pay attention to the space behind our body. Well, we do that as a technique in warrior training, and then in hydrostasy, we can embody that feeling, the feeling of the abstract present. So now you're aware of the finite and the infinite. You're aware of the literal and the abstract at the same time. Talk about impeccable self-awareness. You're aware of the finite aspect of the human experience, the ego, and you're aware of the infinite aspect. And I don't mean aware as in some concept that you have to remember later that you filed into your mind because you just read it from a piece of paper. I'm talking about attention is above the threshold of active recognition, paying attention in this moment right now to the abstract quality of the present moment. Practice is done. That's the end of hydrostasy. And then, of course, is the abstract principles to help you maintain the second attention. And that's it. I need nothing else in my life. Everything else will work itself out. I'll always be doing this and that and the other thing at the same time. I don't need this. I don't need that, because everything I need. Now, this is where we really start to talk about law of attraction. Everything.
And that's how the universe has your back.
That is a way of looking at it. Yes. The best way to say
you become connected.
you
to
have
the
your
universe.
own back. And then
Yes.
at a certain
Yeah.
point, you can't say the universe because there's no subject and object. Because we're not just saying it as a catchy quote on Facebook. We're all one, man. No, we're really feeling the oneness. We're actually engaging that in the present moment. Maybe Shayna can't see it. Maybe Jerry can't see it, but I feel it. And they should be able to see the four derivatives, the four whatever. You can see I'm starting to get exasperated with naming things. But one, I'll just start with the best one, and that's impeccable self-awareness. If Jerry dropped out of the sky and she said, Ernest, you're kind of pissed off right now. Where's your peace of mind? Or a mind not fighting itself. How does it fight itself? It's below the threshold of active recognition, lost in cognition of words, comparing, contrasting, trying to figure it out, limiting itself, judging other people, yada, yada, yada. I call that ordinary cognition, by the way. That is ordinary cognition, where the person is creating the psychology that they need to adapt to, the situations that they need to adapt to. They put themselves there. Impeccable self-awareness, peace of mind. I remind myself of these every day, and yet I'm drawing a blank. Impeccable self-awareness. Oh, okay, yeah. Emotional balance. And some of these do relate. Like if you have peace of mind, then of course you have some sort of emotional balance. But these would be some of the characteristics that if somebody dropped out of the sky, they would be able to evaluate where I'm at in my practice, because these things should be evident. What is the fourth one, Donna? Do you remember? It's just slipping my
A
mind.
calm attitude.
Yep. Calmness. Have you ever been in a stressful situation and there's just this one person who just seems as cool as a cucumber, like they thrive in those types of situations? I know Donna's familiar with that. She's mentioned that before. But that calm attitude, even in the face of uncalmness. It sounds like patience. Attitude. Okay, I think that's right. Attitude. So these would be the indications. And I would know. I would know if you're practicing or not. I would have to follow you around for a little while. That's probably true. But you would also be able to evaluate my practice based on some of these things.
Or evaluate your own practice
That's key. I mean,
by those things. I mean,
yeah.
when I get pissed off about what somebody said, I go, wait, what the hell was that? What the hell was that? You know, where did that come from and why?
Yep. All right. And then when we talk about the energy body, the physical body, what displaces balance, I can talk about all of that as well. What are the elements in the human experience that displace our balance? Well, we've already addressed the number one thing, and that's our thinking. The way that our mind interacts with our mind and our environment. All right. All this makes sense? Any questions?
You started to talk about the enemies of knowledge, but then,
That's a
kind
separate
of-
topic. Yeah.
okay,
I just said that the first enemy of knowledge is distraction from the moment itself. The first
Okay.
enemy of knowledge is a mind that is not consciously aware of itself. Or a mind that is above the threshold of active recognition. That's the way that we prefer. Just like present moment. I don't like the word present moment. I prefer to say the moment happening now. Of course, that's a full sentence as opposed to presence, but it's a better representation because it doesn't sound like a snapshot. It sounds like something that's constantly moving and changing, because the present moment is constantly moving and changing. There is no present moment. There is a moment that is always moving and changing, and we're a part of it. We are it. All right, any questions, comments, or concerns? But this is, now we have a lot in the middle, you know, to get to what I've just described. But that's the gist. So my practice, I'll back it up. If I find myself losing any of those characteristics, then I need a rule of three. I need to make sure that I'm paying attention to myself. Chances are, though, I see it before it turns into emotion. I see the cognition, or I see the pull towards something. And that is what I call, and we'll talk about this more, but that is the hydrostatic effect. The hydrostatic effect is that you, through practice, are so familiar with peace and balance that you can feel when you're going away from it. And now you are your own self-regulating mechanism.
I'm curious how you rule of three now.
Well, my rule of three is typically I will just use, it's not as much of a form of counterbalance as it is using the rule of three anytime I want to change the direction of my mind and keep it there. And it's the same way that anybody would rule of three. I'll talk it out. I'll use words. I'll say, here I am, and in this moment I can feel this. And then I keep my mind there. And by mind, I keep those points of attention active. So it's a rule of three to determine where I want my kite to go in the sky, as opposed to just counterbalancing because I have forgotten my practice. I can't forget my body. I don't even think I can anymore. I can't imagine being so. Drugs could do it. Certain drugs I think could do it for sure. But I have a hard time imagining myself not being aware of myself. I've completely flipped the dynamic to where now I can't even imagine not feeling
So
presence.
you use less words, and the words that you use point you towards feelings,
Yes,
points of attention that are feeling associated or seeing associated,
yes,
not,
exactly.
I don't mean visual seeing.
I know what you mean. I know the perspective, the broader perspective of things. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a broader and focused at the same time perspective of things, because you're seeing both simultaneously. But when I
The
build that,
reason for that is because you have felt the pull away from a hydrostatic state to a less hydrostatic state, whether it's cognition or physical ailment or whatever is pulling you away, and your feelings and your cognition about that, or your unbalanced focus in that area. And so because because you are primarily operating above the threshold of recognition, to degrees, you have felt the pull away from it to a degree, and so picking it back up so your rule of three is different than when it was going from basic alignment to counterbalance and back. It's different.
it's different, but it's still there for me. So
The
it's,
principle
yeah.
applies, but the ways that you do it are different because of the momentum of your practice.
And also because of the way that I use counterbalance, the way that I use that word typically, it doesn't just mean, the way that you're using it. And I do agree with that. Like, I think that makes complete sense to me. But typically when I'm using that word in context, it means that I have forgotten the practice. We have forgotten, and now we need to counterbalance back to the practice. But if you never, that's usually how I use the term counterbalance. It means that we have forgotten, and now we need to counterbalance back to the practice using the redirection method of the rule of three. However, it's not counterbalance because I have forgotten, because I don't forget. And since I don't forget, and I'm always, at least to some degree, perennially aware of myself in the present moment, it's now navigating. It's just choosing. And this is where deliberate modulation and sensing energy come in. It would look exactly like the rule of three, except for without the forgetting element. I am talking myself through the deliberate modulation and how I want to feel. It's actually more just reminding myself, which is what the rule of three always is. It's just reminding yourself of your practice, reminding yourself of your awareness and your points of attention. That's kind of still what I'm doing. I'm reminding myself that I want to build this pyramid, because when I get to the top of the pyramid, I am in this hydrostatic axis. So I want to get myself there every single day by building this pyramid, and, I'll build the pyramid for you. But building the pyramid is the rule of three. That's how I build it. So, for example, one of the building blocks of my pyramid is the three treasures: awareness. And so the three treasures starts like this. You have the body, and we focus on three primary points, although I add points. I add the feet 100%. So, but we have the lower Dantian, the middle Dantian, and the upper Dantian. So those start as points of attention inside of our body, right? Because of non-interference, those points you feel their growth as if they're expanding. So the lower Dantian, that expands, it feels like it's down and into the earth, slightly outside of your body. Where the middle Dantian, that feels like it's inside your body, like it's moving from within. That's your chi, your inner chi. And then you have Shen that's rising. So Jing lower Dantian, Shen middle or Qi middle Dantian, Shen upper Dantian. And now you feel two things at the same time: deeply rooted, solid and secure, and expanding, moving, growing at the same time. Does that make sense? And I will use what looks like the rule of three to establish that every single day. And I build upon it, and I build this pyramid. And by the time I get to the top of my pyramid, it's usually by the time I'm leaving out the door, or even before when I start doing movement and Shayna's walking the dogs. But I get to the top of my pyramid and I have the axis of hydrostasy, which implies that the hydrostatic effect is already in place. And I'll define all of these terms better in Qigong because it's the delivery of the practice itself. But the hydrostatic effect is the sun. It is our oceans. It is our atmosphere. Every atom has a hydrostatic effect. It is the balance that occurs with expanding pressure and imploding mass or gravity. And when those two pressures balance each other, you get power. You get the power for life, which is seen in the sun, it's seen in the solar system, it's seen in the spiraling galaxy, it's seen in our oceans, it's seen in our biological insides, and it's seen inside of the atom itself, that it creates this sphere. You could call it the probability cloud if you wanted to. But the idea is that in practice, we create this feeling of balance, which means, of course, if we're doing something that's taking us away from that balance, whether it's our behavior, whether it is our cognition, whether it is our emotion, we feel our, and remember, this is moving along this axis. This circle's not stagnant. It's moving along the axis because balance is always changing and growing. But as long as we don't exist outside of the extreme, we won't suffer as much as we balance. We can adapt. So Wim Hof method. If you were to never practice Wim Hof and you just go outside and you jump in a fucking frozen lake, you're going to probably suffer hypothermia and you could die because you went into an extreme. You didn't give that changing balance an opportunity to slowly change with change, which is adaptation. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and Michael's probably recognizing all of that from what you do in the mat, what you do in the yoga practice, what you,
True.
everything you just explained is what the yoga mat meditation convergence experience is. That's the goal. But like I said earlier in the class, you have mapped out how you take that off the mat and live your life. You know, it's not just when you're practicing Tai Chi or yoga or you're meditating or doing Reiki or whatever, those, it's how you take it off the mat and into your life. And it's never, you're never without it. It's just how you adapt to whatever you're doing at the moment by doing all of those things.
Yeah, so typically the world wants to start on the mat and then learn to take it off. We start off the mat and learn to take it on. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yeah. I think though, just to make one, and I think it's exactly on, but I think just to make one distinction that yoga is 8 limbs. It's not only the asana. So
Sure.
So, right, so this focus, concentration, and meditation, and then how you act in the world, how you live, you eat well, you what goes in, what the body is going to come out, all that stuff, and how you think about it is all part of the overall word of yoga.
Right.
Whereas the movement is, very maybe Westernized aspect of it. I think we all get that, but there's so much more to it. So it's a more complete practice, similar to the whole practice that you presented here. Yeah.
Of
And-
course, there's more to it. There's not a lot of how-to.
There's not a lot of how to.
This bridge is all about the how-to actually do
Yeah.
it outside of the studio.
That's That's just interesting. It's not a lot of the how-to in English. It's translated in English. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, like directly in the book. You just read it straight through, and then it is the how-to. But I
But then
hear
again,
you,
it's
and
not like, yeah,
well, you have to know how to study it and have to, but it really is a direct steps on the human being. We just don't necessarily take it that way, but it literally, if you read it, it's, I don't want to take this off topic too much here, but it is like a how-to instruction book of a guy in a battle talking to God, and God is saying to him back the exact instructions for a man, how to. It's just
yeah,
it's a little bit abstract because it's
yeah,
Hindu translated to English. You've got to study it for years, but it's very, if you take it very direct, it's just a very short book, and it's an instructional booklet. So
it
Yes,
is.
uh,
Yeah,
it's a lot of skipping steps.
I love
it is a
I
lot
love
of
A
this.
lot
skipping
of
steps.
skipping steps.
It is,
Yeah,
I have the Bhagavad Gita on my shelf, and
and
it's one
I've
of
read it
my
too. Yeah.
reference books. So yes, and it's been my frustration, and it
yeah,
doesn't mean that it's not a good instruction booklet, is okay, how do I apply this to this modern day world, mind and habit? And it was written at a time when the society itself was very different. So we have a lot of momentum and accumulation and habit and cognition that get in the way of the principles. So this is actually a more detailed how to.
Yeah.
for
The
sure, for
abstract
sure.
concepts are there, but there's a lot of skipping steps there for me. I wouldn't know. I mean, I read it and it resonates with me, but how to do it is skipped a lot of steps for me to be able to follow it.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. That's my Me Too
For
moment.
everybody, for most
Yeah,
everybody who's ever practiced yoga. So, one of the interesting things about that though is that with the way that it's delivered, with the way that it's written with a lot of religious context. I know that we want to say that it's non-religious, but it was heavily influenced by Buddhism and Hinduism, and you can't say that it wasn't, because we all know that it was heavily influenced by these religions. We want to say that it's non-religious, but yet it is heavily influenced by these religions, and you can kind of see that as well. Also in the language, like I can't stand reading something that is like, when a man knows what a man knows, and the man is good for the men, and it's like, what the hell are we talking about?
yeah. That